Hello neighbors, it's Brad here from etrailer, and today we are taking a look at installing the Demco Air Force One fixed braking system on a 2026 GMC Sierra 1500. Now when it comes to different braking systems on your flat tow vehicle, you're gonna have to have one. You really can't get away legally with a truck like this without having one in place. And you have a few options. Portable ones work fine and the installation is really pretty easy overall. But if you're going to be flat towing quite often and you don't want to have to set that up or store it every time, going to a fixed system really is a great benefit, because once you get it installed, all you have to do is hook up this air cable, get the rest of your components all set up, put it in flat tow mode and you're good to go. There's no setup. It's pretty well plug and play. But with that, the installation can get a little bit tricky. But as far as the choosing a braking system for air brakes, the Air Force One is by far the one that is tried and true. We install a ton of them here at etrailer, so we're going to have lots of content, not only on the vehicle side, which we're going to be focusing on, but also getting the tank installed on your RV is going to be specific to the chassis that it's on. It's all kind of the same concept, but the first thing that I would recommend doing before looking at this system is take a look at the back of your RV. A lot of newer ones are prepped with a port for air, and if that's the case, then you can get away doing a second vehicle kit, which focuses specifically on the vehicle and doesn't have the tank for the RV because you don't need it. And if that's the case, it does become quite a bit easier of an installation. Now, also, there's going to be two different configurations of the Air Force One that you can get, and that really comes down to the indication of braking. So you can get one with an LED or a wireless coach link like we installed today, and that way you can get a nice read that the brakes are being applied by looking at a monitor on your dash rather than looking in the camera trying to see the light up with your back camera. So that's my preferred method. There's not a whole lot to see because once it's installed, depending on how you do it, it's all going to be pretty well hidden, but the actuation is going to occur when you press on the brakes. It's going to send air pressure through the tank, through this coiled section to our main unit, and eventually to our cylinder. So we can take a look at that. So first glance, you really can't see anything, but as we look a little bit closer, you're going to see the cylinder mounted up on the brake pedal, and that's anchored to the floorboard. So as we press the brakes proportionally on the RV, it'll translate that to the cylinder on our pedal. And so if you brake hard, it's going to brake hard on the truck. And if you just lightly tap it, same thing goes for the vehicle. So here's our monitor that we have. It just plugs into a cigarette style outlet, and you can see we have it powered up. And as I hit the brakes, we see immediately that comes on. So that's really nice that we know the brakes are being applied. So definitely a cool feature, because as I mentioned before, you can mount this up, and that way if you're hitting the brakes and you're wondering if it's working, you can see physically that it is. Whereas on a camera, the small LED would be really tricky to see. So that's why, you know, is it important? I think so. For those of you that like to monitor things out on the road and keep your eyes on the road, this is going to be the best option. So now that we've taken a look at the braking system and talked a little bit about the benefits and why this might be something that you're interested, let's take a look at the installation. As I mentioned, it's a little bit tricky just because it's kind of new to most people. Even if you're mechanically inclined, putting a braking system on a vehicle is kind of unique. But luckily, this one relies on a lot of air pressure. So as far as wiring goes, it's actually pretty simple. And they give you things like a reed switch that really makes it nice and easy as far as getting everything wired without really having to pick up any other components. Now, something to keep in mind is this truck does require a battery disconnect or disconnecting the battery. So that might be something you want to pick up. But sans that, it's going to be a great system overall. So let's take a look at the installation, and if you decide that maybe this is something that you're not going to want to tackle yourself, totally get it, but totally worth getting this system because it is that good. And if that's the case, you can find someone close to you to get the installation done for you by using our dealer locator. You'll simply put in your zip code and find a list of shops that you can pick from to get the braking system installed and have you out there on the road flat towing. Now, when it comes to getting a fixed braking system, none of them are particularly hard. And I would say the Air Force One's actually quite a bit easier, at least on the vehicle side, because there's not a whole lot of electrical that goes into it. The main thing is having your components in a spot that makes sense and getting it mounted up nice and then making the connections in between. So I'm going to show you all the components and roughly where I'm going to put them. And then I'll get them all mounted up and then show you the connections. So first we have our breakaway switch. You're going to find this on every braking system, and this is going to be the last line of defense. If this was to pull, That means that everything's failed as far as tow bar, safety cables, and this is going to apply the brakes on the vehicle, bringing it to a stop. That way it's not rolling down the highway. As far as getting this mounted up, there's not a lot of great spots on this truck to do it. A lot of times we end up using these plastic portions here to mount some things. The breakaway switch, I do find that on the top of our base plate, underneath the bumper, there's a factory bolt. More than likely, I'm going to mount this up. It shouldn't really be in the way of our arms or anything like that. So this will probably live somewhere in this vicinity. Another thing that we're going to need for our brakes to work is going to be our air fitting. This is going to get air from the RV and be transmitted through this cable to our quick connect fitting, and eventually this 1/4 inch push connect will run to our main unit, which will then go to our cylinder to apply the brakes. So being that we have to hook this up, this is also going to be one that we're going to mount up front. So you have this bracket here, same thing. I may end up mounting it in the plastic here or find some metal that's nice and solid. The main thing is you know, as it goes down the highway and it's kind of bouncing around, you don't want that to damage your bumper and you want it to stay secure. So we may have to get a little bit creative as far as mounting up, but by the time I get everything mounted up, I'll show you what I ended up doing. So pretty simple. We have 2 wires off our breakaway and then that 1/4 inch air line. These are both going to run up to our main unit. This is what the main unit looks like, and it's a pretty small footprint, and it's also pretty simple. There's 2 wires. One of these is going to go to a ground. The other one is going to attach to the wire from our breakaway switch. Now that does leave 1 wire from our breakaway switch. That's going to run to 12-volt power. But the main thing on this is going to be the air in and air out. Vacuum, this is normally for tapping into a booster line. We don't need to worry about that on our truck today. So this will be nice and easy for us. The air in, that's going to be the incoming air from that push connect fitting that we mounted up front. So that 1/4 inch air line tube will run up, go into the push connect here, and then the air out will run through the firewall, through a grommet, and eventually to our cylinder. Now getting this mounted up, you can get pretty creative. It does generally live in the engine bay. So if you really wanted to, you could kind of mount it on the core support. You could mount it in this area. I found I like to really keep my stuff clean looking to where you really don't even know it's there. So there's a pocket right here behind the headlight. And since we already have our grill taken off for our base plate, removing the headlight is just going to be a series of bolts, and that's really going to open it up to where I can mount it up here. It's still going to fit with the plastic cover, and it's going to be simple because the connections, I mentioned they need a ground. There's a factory ground that we can use, which is really nice. So self-tapping this in is going to get us set up, and then from that air out, as I mentioned, that's just going to run in. So we'll find a grommet that's on our firewall to pass everything through, and then once we head inside, I'll show you the rest of the connections. This box will just live underneath the dash. You can kind of mount it wherever, and we'll tie that in to our reed switch. Now, when we do need to get power to this, obviously, so what we'll do when we run our 1/4 inch airline tube is also run an extra wire through that grommet at the same time that will eventually tap into 12-volt power. That way we can get powered signal to this. Beyond that, none of this is terribly difficult, like I said, and as far as wiring goes, it's probably one of the easier ones as far as a fixed system, and we're going to be focusing just on the vehicle. On the RV side, it can be a little bit tricky because you're going to be tapping into your supplied air as well as your metered air, and you're going to be under your RV for a little bit. Some newer RVs are already prepped, so what I would recommend to you is check the back side of your RV if it's relatively new and see if there's an air fitting. If that's the case, you're in luck because there's already a tank there that you can tap into, but you do want to double check the Air Force One kit to make sure that it's going to be the proper fitting for your connection. So a Spartan versus a Freightliner is going to be slightly different, so take a look at yours, and again, if you have that fitting, you're in luck. Now I got everything all mounted up, and I'll show you how I did it all. And I ended up mounting our main unit, and this is where we're going to start to kind of show where all the connections go, right behind the headlight. And I love it. It's super clean. I did have to get quite a bit of hardware off to get the headlight to slide out, and I wasn't able to fully remove it, nor did I need to. I just need a little bit of extra space. It does get a little bit tricky as far as getting it self-tapped in, unless you have a right angle. But overall, would I do it again? Yeah, I'm really happy with it, but you might want to look at an easier spot if this is your first time, or you're really not wanting to spend a whole lot of time on it. You can simply mount it up. One of the other installers, Daniel, has a video on Air Force One on a similar truck, a little bit older, but he ended up mounting it here, and that would make the installation a lot easier. And that's kind of where it comes down to how clean do you want to make it versus ease of install. So this is what I ended up doing. And as far as connections, something I'll point out is this is an electric assist brake. So you do need to make sure there's a cap kit that has a small rubber plug. And there's an exhaust port on the side of our unit. So you'll put that plug in, and then there's a small acorn nut that you'll put on there to cap it up. So that's where I have this tightened down on there. And then also at the bottom, there's going to be this hose that I put on. You're going to want to put the cap that's included and just a small 2-inch section on that barb fitting for the vacuum, and that's going to seal all that up. And that way it can work properly with our brake system. So get that in place. And then continuing on with the air, we have our air in. This I ended up routing. You can see my airline here. I ran it across the front of the bumper, and I ended up mounting it here just because it matches up to the back side of the RV of where the air fitting would be. I ended up taking the bracket off that has that 90 degree just with 2 wrenches, and then I tightened it back down after drilling a hole. It's nice and solid. I really like it here. I think that's going to be a good spot for them. So with your push connect fitting, when you push that airline in, just make sure it seats nice. You should be able to try to tug on it and it's going to hold in place, but also get a nice clean cut. So if you have a set of tubing cutters, before putting that line in, I do recommend doing that. It'll give it a nice clean cut and retain the circle shape. That way it's really going to cut down on the potential for leaks. So, so as we saw, we have that airline routing over there. We also have our breakaway switch. So this, I ended up cutting out a small section and sliding this back. I made a small bracket, believe it or not, with the 90-degree angle bracket for our airline mounting, and I was able to bolt that up, or actually drill it into some metal behind the bumper. And it was just a small little 90-degree bracket, but really I just took my universal cutting tool, or if you want to call it a oscillating tool, cut this out and then slid it in, and I think it's really clean. I'm really happy with this. Again, this truck is not a very easy one to get everything mounted up, so this is what I ended up doing. They're both nice and solid, and that's going to be really the most important thing. So now that we've kind of gone this airline routing over here, let's take a look at the breakaway switch wires. And there's going to be a black wire and an orange wire. The orange wire, I'm going to send that towards the battery. That way we can connect eventually to 12-volt power. So I ended up running it right here, and this red wire, this is from our charge line. If you're putting a charge line in, again, that's got to go to the battery as well. That's something that you may want to add on later, but I would definitely try to do that when you're doing your diodes. It'll make it a lot easier. This just routes up, and eventually I made my way up here. So I left a little bit of the wire exposed. So you'll see the orange wire I spliced in with the red wire. That this one actually runs along the cowl of the wipers and runs inside. So this is where we get our power to our reed switch and our wireless coach link. So just keep that in mind when we go inside. And then I attached it to our fuse holder and then to our battery. Now this is a vehicle that does require a battery disconnect or to cut the power to it when you drive. So if you are doing a battery disconnect like we have today from Roadmaster, make sure that you do have this on the constant 12 volt. You don't want to put it on the disconnect because, well, if you cut the power, obviously it's not going to work. So just keep that in mind, put it on the post. And also don't put the fuse in until you have everything all hooked up. So that way you don't have power going through it. So now mentioning that red wire that does route over, we also still have an airline tube from our main unit. But the black wire from the breakaway, we want to capture that. So that actually runs back. You can see it here. And just kind of made my way over. And it was pretty tight here. I could have extended the wire if I needed to, but I used a heat shrink butt connector, and I use these on any connection wired that's on the exterior of the vehicle or in the engine bay. That way it stays nice and safe. Once you heat it up, it'll shrink around the wire, creating a nice watertight seal, and that way you don't have to worry about, you know, it breaking down long term. This is going to be connected to one of the black wires from our main unit. So there was originally just two, so black goes to black from the breakaway. Pretty easy there. The other black wire is just a ground wire. So I use the factory ground here that I use for everything else in our installation. So I just routed the wire up, put a ring terminal, and then tighten it back down. So pretty simple there. And then we have our air out. Air out is going to run to our cylinder, and that I just routed along here. Tried to make it as clean as possible. And where I ran through in the grommet is going to be the hood latch release. So when you're underneath the dash, you can follow that and find that grommet. Just poke a hole through it. And you can use your airline tube as the pull wire to get your 12-volt power wire, which I have routed here. That's that one that runs over and connects with the fuse holder. But try to get that passed through at one time. It'll make your life a lot easier. And a little bit of silicone spray will help kind of push that tube through. So with the airline tube and that power wire ran through the grommet where our hood latch release is, that brings us to the connections underneath. So it's actually fairly easy. So here you can see that red wire that I passed through there, and that I ended up connecting to the red wire from our wireless coach link. So there's a red and a white, so just run the red wire out to the battery to that fuse connection. Your white wire, this is going to attach to the brown bullet connector off of our reed switch. So I just used a regular butt connector on this. And then off of that reed switch, there's also a blue wire. This is just a ground. So I picked an extra blue wire that I had just to keep it cohesive, but this could be a white wire, it could be whatever. This routes back, and this panel, if you just pull this back, there's a few clips, but this is gonna give you access to a factory ground. So I just put a ring terminal there and grounded it, so that makes it nice and easy for you. And that's really it for the electrical connection. So that's the great part about this system, is it's pretty basic as far as electric goes. So the main thing that you want to probably be concerned about is getting your cylinder set up right. So what I ended up doing is, I'll pull this back a little. If you pull back this cap that holds the carpet in, this will give you some reference to it. But our bracket just kind of goes at a slight angle. The top corner sits right at the frame glue that they use. But I just kind of got this anchored in. And what I recommend doing when setting this up is lightly get this to a spot that, you know, your foot's not going to make contact with it. And just kind of get it to be set, and then dial in your anchor length to where it has a little bit of play, and then any adjustments, fine tuning to get slack out, do it on this bracket, but get it pretty close. And when you tighten down that grub screw, just make sure that it's flush. That should be enough to hold that in place. You don't want to overdo it. You can actually damage the wire and the sheathing on it. And once you get this kind of self-tapped into play, really test it, because what you're going to want is a nice clean actuation when it's being applied. So even though it looks like it's at a downward angle, your pedal tends to swoop. So push this down, pull this back, and it should be a pretty straight shot overall. So that's kind of what we're looking for. And you can see pretty quickly as I push this down, the reed switch doesn't illuminate. So it's not going to give you any issues when normally driving, but when the brakes are applied, that'll kick on because it'll pick up on that sensor, and that'll send the signal from our wireless coach link, which I just zip tied up to the bracket by the OBD2 port, and transmit the signal to the dash on the RV. So if you wanted to test that, you'll just plug in your monitor to a 12-volt source and push this down, pull back the cylinder. You should see that light up. If it's not, make sure you have your fuse in. But beyond that, that's pretty much it. Airline tube, I just kind of wrap this up. I can zip tie it. Give yourself a little bit of slack. It doesn't need a ton. But all of this I'll put and zip tie up so you won't even see it. But beyond that, that's really all of the installation. So in order to test to make sure that it's working, you're going to want to hook up to your RV and put that coiled cable together, applied the brakes, and it should apply on here. So you can check your monitor light in the process of that. But just take your time with this. None of it's particularly difficult. This is actually one of the easier vehicles that I've done a braking system setup with the Air Force One. So just take your time, make it as clean as you want, and follow this video along with those instructions. They are pretty extensive, but there's a lot of good information in there that'll really help guide you along with this video. We're gonna get our RV side done, and something that I'll preface is if you have a newer coach that already has an air fitting, it's very possible that you already have a tank installed. So as newer ones are coming out, they have things called brake sync. There's a few other names that they use. So look for an air fitting on the back. And a lot of times that's going to be a good sign. And if that's the case, you won't have to worry about installing anything here. You do need to make sure that you get the proper connection hose, but you can buy the second vehicle kit of the Air Force One, which is just going to be the vehicle side. But if you don't have this air fitting, we're going to be getting this installed, and really all it's going to come down to is making sure that we have air running through this line when we apply the brakes on the coach, and that means that we do need to tie into the supplied air as well as the metered air to get that to work. So let's head underneath and I'll show you exactly how I ran it. It is going to be specific to the coach that you have. Ours today is a Winnebago Forza, which is on a Freightliner XCS chassis. It's the 340 model. So yours is going to look like this underneath more than likely. But if yours is different, the instruction manual is pretty good about laying out the different manifolds that you'll be tying off of. And really you're just looking for two lines and really mounting up a tank. So on ours today, what I did is I found our manifold, and it's bolted up into the frame. And as far as getting your tank mounted up, you want it nice and secure. There's not a whole lot of great spots on this, so I ended up trimming our bracket to give us a little bit of clearance, and I used the same bolts to mount that back up where the manifold is. So we're just right ahead of the rear axle. Here's our manifold, and that's kind of what you're gonna look for anyway, because your air lines will come off of that. So look for this area, it's kind of in between your airbags. And as I mentioned, our tank, I mounted it up to where we have our fittings facing towards the back. It makes it a little bit easier of a run. And I just utilized the same bolts up there. So I did trim that bracket just using an angle grinder to give us that clearance, but it's nice and solid mounted up there. And the two different sides of the tank, you'll see on this side, we have a reducer. This is gonna be where we feed this to the supplied air and then also back to the back of the coach to get to our fitting. The other side is gonna be our supplied air. So let's take a look at that first and I'll show you exactly where it goes. In your kit, you're gonna have this large T, and you'll see that this is a large diameter push connect fitting on both sides, and then it reduces down to the 1/4-inch airline tube. So all that extra airline that you had from your vehicle, you're gonna be using it now underneath the RV, so you can go ahead and grab that. And we need to cut the factory supply line, and so I recommend, just as we used for cutting any of our airline tubes, a set of tubing cutters really comes in handy here to get a nice clean cut. That hose is not very flexible, and a lot of times it's pretty tight to be able to get this to slide in, so this is definitely going to come in handy. Something else that I'll also recommend is these lines will get kind of some buildup on it, and that's going to cause it to not seat up as well and potentially have air leaks. So what I recommend doing is getting a little bit of brake cleaner, spraying that on a rag, and wiping the ends of the airline once you make that cut. Now, we're essentially going to cut the line, put this in place, but as you cut that main supply line, all that air is going to rush out. So don't be surprised when you cut that line, you're going to have air burst out, that pressure is going to drop, and then you'll be good to go. As far as getting to that line, it's kind of tucked up there, but I'll show you where it's at. Up in the frame, you'll see way up top here, there's a large diameter green hose. And it should be the same size as that push connect fitting. So I went ahead and cut that, put that in place, then put our 1/4-inch airline tube and ran that down to the supply side on our tank. Now, again, be careful cutting this. You want to make sure it's on a straight run. That way you're not having a kink in that line, because that can definitely cause an air leak. Now, as far as the metered air, we're also tying into that. So we illuminated this so you can see a little bit better, but so that main supply line that we tied in is right here. And then going down from the manifold, you'll see this kind of 45 and a slightly larger diameter black hose. I think it's 1/2 inch. It's larger than a 1/4 inch, but this is where I tied in. I just found the nice straight run before cutting and putting that in place, and then this just routes over, and you're going to want to make sure that you're putting it into this reducer, not the far end, because that's going to be our supply to the back. So just make sure you're putting in that push connect fitting. The line will slide in there. There's a little ferrule that'll slide over, and just like any push connect fitting, push it in. You should get a little resistance, and then push a little further, should lock it. Give it a quick tug just to make sure that it's nice and tight. And then from here, once you have those connections made, this little 90, this is where we're going to run the rest of our line back to our air fitting that's going to hook up to our towed vehicle. Best way to do this is just route it along the frame rail, zip tying it up along any wiring that's there from the factory, some wire loom to keep it away from anything hot or moving. Now running that airline back, as I mentioned, I just followed the frame rail. I went on the passenger side. There's some nice channeling that you can run it through. There's holes in the frame, and there's also plenty of wire loom to zip tie it up. So just going to do that occasionally to make sure that it's in place. And then I just made my way back here. Before coming back to this cross member and our hitch, from here I just loop this over, and then I mounted our air fitting on our driver's side. And generally you're going to want to mount it on the same side that you've mounted it on your towed vehicle, so that way you're not crossing over. You can use self-tapping screws, you can drill it out and use the included bolts if you want, but pretty easy from here. You just get that push connect fitting in, and that's going to do it. So once you get that all installed, you're going to want to hop back in the RV, let it run for a little bit, and make sure you can't hear any audible leaks. So once you get that air pressure up to the normal PSI, you can shut it off, and you're going to want to check for leaks using soapy water. So any connection, just spray those down and look for any large air bubbles forming. If you have that, you're going to want it to either recut or at least try to reseat on the push connect fitting. And keep in mind there's obviously pressure on like the supply line, so you might want to bleed that pressure out just by undoing the fitting before trying to redo it. But from here, we're pretty well good to go to hook up our vehicle. If you did things a little bit different, feel free to send some pictures of how you did it or leave a comment. That really helps us kind of get ideas of what neighbors like you are doing at home during your installations, and it's helpful for other neighbors just like you. They're going to be flat towing their Sierras. My name's Brad. Thanks for joining us.